The American people have witnessed what is the greatest failure of any presidential administration in the history of our country.
I want the American people to know that from the very first day, President Donald Trump has put the health of America first.
Tonight on ABC4 News, all eyes on Salt Lake City, where the vice presidential candidates took to the national stage in tonight's one and only vice presidential debate. And we have post-debate analysis tonight. Good evening, I'm Emily Flores, and tonight, as we said, the first and only vice presidential debate held at the University of Utah between Mike Pence and Kamala Harris. Now, ABC4's chief political correspondent Glenn Mills live outside of Kingsbury Hall for our debate coverage. He's been there all evening. And Glenn, what did we see at tonight's debate?
Well, Emily, a much different contrast than what we saw last week. That is for sure. A very spirited debate, exchange of ideas, getting into a lot of policy tonight. We are joined by Governor Gary Herbert. Governor, you were inside, able to see this event. And before we get into analysis of the debate as you saw it, I'd like to get your thoughts on the eyes of the nation, maybe even some worldwide, looking to Utah for this event. What does that mean for the state?
Well, I can tell I've talked to two people that were here from out of state that said they want to move to Utah. So the fact that we were kind of the center of the universe for a couple of hours here with this debate is an important opportunity for Utah to showcase what we are and what we stand for. It's maybe the most important vice presidential debate in history. Certainly is a significant event for the presidential election and who could be the heartbeat away for the president. So it's nice to kind of have people here, and we're good at hosting people in Utah.
You and I were talking before we went on the contrast between last week and this week, tonight. Give us your thoughts on that.
Well, a lot more substance and detail and specifics, and not just rhetoric. And again, it was more like a food fight last time. This one has substance, and I think they both acquitted themselves well in staking out their positions. I don't think there's any big surprise on the positions they were taking, really. And I'm not sure anybody's minds are going to be changed. I think if you're a Republican like me, you thought Mike Pence did a good job of talking about limited government, free markets, capitalism, rule of law, etc. If you're a Democrat on the Kamala Harris part, you like the fact that government intervention, health care for all, free college, and more redistribution of the wealth. And so, again, I think they both staked out their positions well, articulated them well. I don't know if they changed anybody's minds.
So who do you believe won the debate tonight?
Well, I'm a little biased because I already come down on the side of a kind of small government, right of center conservative. And again, Mike Pence is a friend of mine. I've known him for a long time, and hard for me not to think he did a pretty good job. But I think they both did a good job of taking their positions. For me, it's not about the personality. It's more about the policy. And so people that come and watch this debate are going to say, what kind of policy do you want to see in this country coming out of Washington, D.C.? I like more devolvement to the policy to the states, a federalism approach, which is what Mike Pence stands for. So I like what he said. And so I don't know what the debate score would be. I think it's probably a push. But I like the policies represented by Mike Pence.
At the top of the ticket, though, sits President Trump. Here in the state of Utah, some Republicans, actually not even in just Utah, but across the country, some Republicans struggle with the president. You just mentioned to you it's about policy, but some have a hard time getting over the behavior and saying, I can overlook that for the policy. Y2 Analytics just had a poll come out the other day that showed President Trump at 50% and Biden at 40% here in the state of Utah. We should see a Republican president 60, maybe even 70% of the vote in Utah. So why do so many struggle with this president?
Well, historically, that's been the case. And again, people bring their own kind of personality to the forefront, and it doesn't line up. Maybe President Trump doesn't line up good with the culture of Utah. Mike Pence, on the other hand, the vice president, his background does line up better with Utah. That being said, I think the demographics of Utah are changing. We're a lot more urbanized now, a lot more diverse in our population and our culture. And so you'd expect things to kind of narrow over time. Maybe we're seeing that epicenter now with this debate or with this presidential campaign. We'll have to wait and see. Let's see what happens in 4 more years, if this is a trend or this is just an anomaly.
Can the next presidential debate set for the 15th be productive?
Well, I hope so. I mean, why have the debates if they're not productive? Again, I think that the American people...
But we agree the last one last week was not productive.
Well, it wasn't
right?
too good. It got bad, it started out bad, and then it got worse. And both sides are to blame for that, I believe. But yes, the American public ought to deserve to hear substance. Here are the policies. This is what I'm going to advocate for. If I'm elected, I will do this. And here's what we need to do to change that. And again, that's why we have debates to talk about specifics and policies and what you're going to do if you're elected. Now, sometimes we promise everything. You know, they said Joe Biden's going to have a repeal the tax cuts of Trump his first day in office. Great. How's he going to do that? That's going to have to be done by the Congress. He can't do it. And so it's a promise that he's going to make that can't be delivered. We'll have to wait and see. And if the Republicans control the Senate, it won't happen. And even if they don't, it may not happen. So, again, hyperbole and exaggeration seems to be a part of politics. I just hope we can do it in a civil, respectful manner and really get down to the nuts and bolts of policy and decide who is it that we want to represent us in the highest office in the land.
We did hear that from Vice President Pence quite a bit, hitting on the tax issue. On the flip side of that, we heard Senator Harris hit on health care.
Yes.
She had a moment where she looked into the camera and says, they're coming after you. If you have a pre-existing condition, they're coming after you. If you know someone with a pre-existing condition, they're coming after you. Should the president and Republicans be talking about repealing the Affordable Care Act when yet they still haven't even put out their own plan that we've seen, something tangible that we can see and look at?
Well, they tried repeal and replace, and one of the great disappointments and failures, I think, was the fact that when they controlled the House and the Senate and the Oval Office and didn't do what we've talked about as Republicans for many years, to repeal and replace. The Democrats wanted to modify and improve. I talked to President Obama about that personally. Let's modify and improve it. Repeal and replace. You can actually get pretty close if you had some kind of willingness to have a bipartisan effort. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. So I think, yes, if you're going to legalize or use the legal courts to, in fact, make it unconstitutional for the Affordable Care Act, what are you going to replace it with? I've talked with the people back in Congress. They all say if that happens, we'll spend time to get a transitional 6 or 9 months period of time where we can transition from the Affordable Care Act to something they would say would be better. So I expect that there will be not just a drop off the cliff and all of a sudden we're out of health care. You'll have a transitional period where Republicans and Democrats will be forced to work with Republicans or vice versa to make sure they get to a point wherever we have at least bipartisanship. That's the big failure of the Affordable Care Act. They should have said when they passed it before, we've got to get at least 25% of Republicans to buy into this, as opposed to just a party line vote. That's meant it was doomed to failure and argument for the rest of its history, which is what we've seen over time.
And we don't want to see the Republicans try to go and enforce something where they don't have any Democratic buy-in either.
No, it's got. You can't. We're too divided as a country.
Right.
If we don't get a bipartisan effort on this, it'll be something we'll fight over forever and a day.
Governor, appreciate your time. You had one of the hottest tickets in town.
Yes, it's
very well tonight.
for the first time I got a good ticket.
All right, appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right. Before the event today, during, and even after, protesters lining up just outside the secure perimeter here at the University of Utah. ABC4's Nick McGurk is out with the protesters tonight, covering that end or angle of the story for us tonight. Nick, what can you tell us?
Well, I can tell you, Glenn, we've seen so many headlines of protests that ended in violence. That was not the case tonight. We didn't see any actual physical clashes between police or protesters, but it got pretty tense. I mean, you can see folks that are left behind here. The crowd certainly was a lot bigger. It was dense. It was packed. There were certainly a lot of people who were not wearing masks out here. You've seen a lot of pro-Trump supporters out here, and I would say most of the people we saw out here did seem to be supporting Trump, but there were Black Lives Matter folks, and there were folks on the other side, some of them identifying as Proud Boys, whom we heard about in the presidential debate when President Trump said, "Stand back and stand by." We had a line of them earlier saying, "Proud Boys, stand the line." And so they were standing there. The Black Lives Matter folks were here, and the swear words were flying between a few of them. So it was tense moments out here, but we didn't see any brawls. We didn't see any violence. Earlier there was a large group of Armenian Americans who are out here for a different reason, and they certainly have their opinion of what's going on in their region with Turkey. So we saw a lot of demonstrators out here for an extremely high-profile event, but at least from where I'm standing, there are barricades. There's the fenced-off area between here and the university. It got tense out here. It didn't seem like any of this discussion was a true debate that moved anything forward. I would doubt that anybody here changed their minds. Certainly some tense moments, not any violence, and it does look like it's pretty much over. Some of the stragglers are here. Nothing like what we saw earlier. And so coming up at 10 o'clock, we'll show you some of those moments where folks were really getting into some of those heated arguments that certainly doesn't appear to be happening right now. Reporting live near the U, I'm Nick McGurk, ABC 4 News.
So Nick, it's loud out where you are as it is here as well, but I don't know how much you got into this, but any incidents involving police and protesters tonight?
You know, not that I saw, Glenn. Earlier on, it was very peaceful, and then as we got to right about the debate time, right about 7:15, you saw large groups sort of migrating toward the fence at the University of Utah, and the police lined up, and there were some folks chanting what they typically chant against police, and the police stood their ground. I saw a couple of officers kind of finger their holsters a little bit, just in case, but nothing escalated to any kind of violence, so nothing that I saw visually. There didn't seem to be a ton of antagonism toward police as the evening went on. It was different groups just shouting at one another, and that did happen for well north of an hour.
Okay. Thank you, Nick. We appreciate that. We're now turning our attention to former State Senator Scott Howe. Scott, contributor to Inside Utah Politics as well on a regular basis. Let's bring you in for your thoughts. Of course, you spent some time with Senator Harris over the weekend. We all had our ideas on how this was all going to play out tonight strategy-wise. How do you feel she did?
I think she did a good job. I think she was precise. I think she showed her prosecutor side, and I think she showed her mother side, and I think she won some hearts tonight.
How so?
Well, I think just with her intelligence. I mean, that was one thing that was very clear, is that she answered the questions, and she was pretty precise on it, and she didn't let things go. I think when he kept saying the new Green Deal, I said, no, that is not what it is. And then when she kept saying, well, there's no fracking, I said, no, this is what we say. And so you saw classic debate back and forth.
Yeah.
But she did a good job.
And a clear strategy tonight from the Pence campaign. He wanted to, paint a picture,
yes,
tying both the, Biden and Harris to the extreme left.
Yeah.
How do you think that all played out in the minds of voters, particularly people here in Utah, where the numbers are lower than what we'd expect on the Republican side?
Yeah, I mean, she's 10 points behind in the last Y2K analytics. She and Biden were. I think that they saw somebody. I think people are just tired of this continually making things up. And when she kept saying, let's deal with the facts, let's deal with the facts, I think people need to be reminded of that. Because we saw what the president does, and we've seen him say so many times, we'll be in churches in April. We'll have a vaccine in 2 weeks. We'll have this. And I think she called it out pretty good.
So where does it go from here? Obviously, last week, we all know how last week went. The next one is scheduled for the 15th.
Right.
Do you see that one being successful?
Only if the president tests negative. If he tests negative, then I think they'll do it. But I've already spoken with the Presidential Debate Commission, and we explained to them what we did when John Huntsman was in quarantine. And through the power of technology, they can do this if they'll both agree to do it. And quite frankly, it's probably going to be a better debate where they can control the mic and they can control the circumstance of what they're doing.
But outside of the president's health, I'm talking from what we saw last week. A lot of voters came away from that saying, I didn't really gain anything from that from a policy perspective. Yeah. And there's been talk, maybe you don't even have the next two debates. Yeah. Is that turning around at all?
Well, I certainly hope it will, because the American people deserve to have that, and they deserve to have see a civil debate. I mean, we can't even call that last disaster, whatever you want to call it. But I would hope that it will turn around, because I don't think it benefits anybody if they don't debate. I don't. But I think if they have control of the debate, it makes a big difference. And quite frankly, the moderator tonight, I've seen you moderate before, and I've seen a lot of people moderate before. You have to control the situation. And Pence did a good job of running over on time, and it's a tough situation. It's really about the moderator.
I didn't sit and count who ran over the number of times, but I think we saw that on both sides as well tonight.
Yeah.
Did the decorum and rules of debate flow better here tonight?
Much better. When you look at how they had respect for each other, And, you know, they were stern because they'd say, Vice President, Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking right now. And he'd say, well, just let me finish this point. So it was so much better in the decorum tonight. It was a billion times better. But you did see a little testiness up there, but that's good. You know, you want to really know your candidate to know how they'd react in a tough situation.
Okay. Scott Howe, appreciate your insight tonight. Thanks so much
Thanks
for
a
being here
million.
with us.
Appreciate it.
Emily, we'll send it back to you in studio.
All right, thank you so much, Glenn. Well, now for a look at how the candidates and audience at tonight's debate stayed safe amid the ongoing pandemic. For that look, we'll turn to ABC4's Haley Hendricks, who has continuing coverage tonight.
Emily, as we continue to fight against the COVID-19 pandemic, people's health and safety continues to remain a top priority. Now, in order to be able to attend tonight's debate, people were required to pass 2 COVID-19 tests and to wear high-grade face masks. In an effort to limit the spread of COVID-19 during Wednesday's vice presidential debate, the University of Utah and ARUP teamed up to provide thousands of COVID-19 tests.
It's both a nasal swab and a throat swab.
As of Wednesday afternoon, University of Utah spokesperson Kathy Willits says more than 2,000 people have been tested for the virus.
Everyone who enters the perimeter will have a negative test before they go in.
Of those tested, Willits says 0.8% of people tested positive.
Another thing we're doing is requiring everyone to wear one of these.
As an additional COVID-19 safety precaution, Willits says all attendees are required to wear a level 3 surgical mask.
And it's just another precaution that we're taking to make sure that everyone, while they're gathered inside the perimeter, is as safe as they can be.
Now we're told that during tonight's debate, if anyone were to take off their mask inside Kingsbury Hall, they would be escorted out by police. Reporting live in Salt Lake City, Haley Hendricks, ABC4 News.
Thank you, Haley.
Biden believes you measure the health and the strength of America's economy based on the health and the strength of the American worker and the American family. On the other hand, you have Donald Trump, who measures the strength of the economy based on how rich people are doing.
Right after a time where we're going through a pandemic that lost 22 million jobs at the height, we've already added back 11.6 million jobs because we had a president who cut taxes, rolled back regulation, unleashed American energy, fought for free and fair trade.
Tonight's vice presidential debate highlighting the differences on how best to improve the economy in the midst of the pandemic. Kamala Harris promising Joe Biden will repeal recent tax cuts for the richest Americans and corporations and invest that money in infrastructure and education. Vice President Pence, on the other hand, suggesting America should stay the current course, touting the current strength of America's middle class. Well, continuing our analysis of tonight's debate, we have Derek Brown joining us, the chair of Utah's Republican Party. He's here in studio with us. We thank you for joining us tonight, Derek.
Thank you, Emily. Good to be here.
So happy that you are here. So give me your overall impressions of the debate tonight.
Well, first of all, I think the Americans were treated to a little more substance than they got last week. I mean, the reality is last week was just a difficult thing all around, and tonight I think we got to the heart of the matter. I think we got to some real issues. There was real dialogue, and I think we saw a contrast. We saw on issues like, say, the Paris Climate Accord. I think the reality is we had one candidate who said we would go back into it. The other one said, no, we'll stay out of it. And so I think we really did get to see some of the contrasts that we were hoping to see tonight.
And, you know, one thing we were talking about before we came into this interview is last week, of course, there was a lot of interrupting to one another. Tonight, you were saying that you thought they would be hypersensitive to that, but there was still some interrupting happening.
There was. And you know, I wanted, you know, the moderator tonight was sort of like a stoplight, you know, red, green, red, green. And I really wanted, you know, I wanted the moderator to not only stop them, but really dig into some of these questions. I mean, simple ones like asking Kamala Harris, would you pack the Supreme Court? You know, she dodged the question, and I wanted a good moderator at that point to go back and say, wait, you know, with all due respect, this is a simple question. Is the answer yes or no? And so I was hoping we'd get a little more things like that out of the moderator, and we didn't get that.
Of course, and a big concern, of course, just to kind of bounce off of what you just said, was would the nominees follow the rules of the debate? Not just interrupting each other, but do you feel like they followed the rules overall? How do you think they did?
You know, I think they did well, except for cutting off at the end. You know, I think both of them could have done a lot better. I mean, even though I'm the chair of the Republican Party, I'll be honest, I think that Kamala Harris did a better job at that than the vice president, but they both did kind of a lousy job at that. But I think what they ultimately did is they were able to put forth their message of what is it that we will do in office. And I think essentially Mike Pence said, look, here's what we agreed to do, and here's what we've done. And Kamala Harris said, look, we'd take a different approach than the president would, and look at our plan, vote for us. And so I think we saw a good sort of sharp contrast.
All right, and Derek, tell us which policy that of Vice President Pence, of course, put forward stood out to you?
Oh, there's so many. I think the one that they came right out of the chute talking about was the response to COVID. And I think what they basically said is, you know, he talked about the fact that they've done the best that they could with the information they had. And I think it's easy to sort of sit back and say, well, I would have done it differently, or I would have done more, I would have done less. And so I think that ultimately that's probably the most important issue that came out of tonight's debate, which is why the moderator chose to start, you know, right out of the chute with that issue. And I think the vice president did a good job of answering that and explaining that they took reasonable steps, and then we saw, you know, differing opinions on what it is that the country needs to do moving forward.
What do you have to say was the most memorable as you were watching there tonight?
Oh, well, I think the one that will be talked about the most is the fly that landed on the vice president's head. So I hate to say it, but in a world of sound bites and social media, you're going to see that clip over and over and over. And so, you know, it is what it is.
You know what, I have to kind of chuckle with, I'm sorry if it's not appropriate, because I was listening into it. I wasn't necessarily watching, so it was social media afterwards. It was the first thing I saw as soon as I tuned in was the fly on Mike Pence's head that everyone looked at.
You know, so I hate to say that, but that's the reality, is we'll probably see that. But there are a lot of great moments where I think we really did see some contrast, and I think that the real winner tonight is the state of Utah, frankly, because we got a chance to host the one and only debate, and it may be the one and only substantive debate that we have.
Right. Do you think that either candidate said or did anything that may have swayed an independent or non-committed voter tonight?
You know, and that's a good question. I don't know if there was one particular moment. I think ultimately, at least when it comes to Mike Pence, you don't see him that often. You see the president, you hear the president, and whenever Mike Pence is seen, you just see him sort of waving. And I think tonight, the American people got a chance to remember who it is, and the fact that this is someone who is, he's consistent, he's strong, he has opinions, he's done this before. I mean, clearly he did not look nervous. I mean, he was very comfortable in this kind of a situation. And so I think for those that may be on the fence, I think this might help the Trump ticket, I think.
And you know, when you bring up comfort, I feel like there was a comfort on both sides that I was surprised by, even.
And I think Senator Harris, considering this is the first time she's really had this kind of limelight, I'll be honest, I think she did well. I think she certainly defended herself well and was in a much more difficult position, because rather than she didn't have a whole lot of a record that she could defend, so she was essentially saying, here's what I would do if elected. Whereas the vice president could say, look, here are the promises I made. You know, when it came to the economy, here's what I said I'd do, here's what I did. When it comes to things like the embassy in Jerusalem, every president up to this point in time said they'd move it to Jerusalem. They didn't do it. We said we'd do it, and we did it. And so I think you see that back and forth quite a bit during the process.
All right, Derek, and last question this evening. Just given the state of the White House, do you think that we may have seen the last national debate before the election even?
My sense is you'll probably have another one. It seems like the president has done remarkably well in terms of his recovery. And so I'm assuming that, that both parties will want to have another shot at having a debate. So I think we'll see more before November 3rd.
All right, a lot of chatter about that going on. Thank you again, Derek Brown, chair of the Utah Republican Party. Thanks for joining us here tonight.
Thanks, Emily. Appreciate it.
All right, well, moving forward with our post-debate analysis, we do want to go back out to ABC4's chief political correspondent, Glenn Mills, live at Kingsbury Hall with much more tonight. Hey, Glenn.
Hey, Emily, a lot of buzz out here at the site of the debate. We are checking in now with Senate President Stuart Adams. President, great to have you with us. First, your thoughts on what unfolded right here behind us in Kingsbury Hall tonight.
Well, my first thought is I think Utah is the greatest state in the nation, and how fitting is it to showcase Utah again to not only the United States, but probably the entire world, to have the only vice presidential debate right here, University of Utah campus in Utah.
And a lot of people saying this one is more consequential than VP debates in the past, just given the fact of what we saw take place last week, where we didn't really get into a lot of policy discussion in the presidential debate. Also, a lot of people pointing to the ages of those at the top of the ticket. Do you believe that people were watching this with closer eyes, really paying attention to, hey, what might this person look like if they end up taking the top spot?
Absolutely, and what I mean, I've known Vice President Pence, and what a great example of a man of integrity. I think he has an impeccable integrity, in fact, and I think we saw that tonight as he talked about the things that he could do, that both he and President Trump can do. I think anyone seeing what he did tonight would be very comfortable if that transition were to happen.
A very clear strategy coming from the Harris campaign tonight, really attacking the vice president on the coronavirus response, on health care, saying, look, they're coming after your health care, and also questioning the integrity of the president. How do you think he responded to those 3 points?
Again, I think he knocked it out of the ballpark. I think he answered them very well. The president was on this, shut down travel, did things that former Vice President Biden didn't want him to do. And then I was kind of amazed at the fact that anyone would lay the current economy at the foot of the president. You know, we wondered about whether Washington was broken. I didn't think in my lifetime I'd see tax reform. President Trump delivered tax reform, and the result of that tax reform, and I think I can remember back to last April when Utah had the lowest unemployment rate in the history of the state, and the United States had the best economy in the history of the United States.
But
and President Trump delivered that, and I listening to Vice President Pence, I am so optimistic that they can do that again.
But there are a lot of, I've never seen this in my lifetime. We have Republicans both here in the state of Utah and on a national level. Former Arizona Senator Jeff Flake would be one of them. Republicans coming out against this president. The last Y2 Analytics poll here in Utah had the president at 50%. Historically, we have seen Republicans a lot higher than that in the state of Utah. Why do Republicans struggle with this president?
Well, I think after listening to this debate tonight, I think not only will President Trump carry Utah, which I think he will, but I think he'll win this election. I mean, when you think about it, President Trump has nominated 2 Supreme Court judges. He's working on a 3rd. Those judges reflect Utah's values, and I think you saw and heard that tonight. You know, my district has Hill Air Force Base that surrounds my district, and he's rebuilt the military. I mean, 4 years ago, I think our military was in, at least financially, wondering what the future and what had for them. And we've seen through the increased economic efforts of President Trump and Vice President Pence, not only the economy gets stronger, but our military gets stronger. I think that's really important to people.
A lot of people are looking at tonight and saying, you know, that's what we want to see. We want to see a policy-driven, spirited discussion, something we didn't see last week. I think that's something we can all agree on. Does President Trump need to change that strategy and be more like the way you saw the vice president performing tonight in the upcoming debates?
You know, I think what you see with President Trump is what you get.
But did that bother you, what you saw last week, though?
Well, you know, what I've seen with President Trump is he delivers. And you know, we've seen some unconventional negotiations, but we've heard tonight, and I've seen it happen, that, you know, through those unconventional negotiations, as I actually went back to Washington, D.C., and saw Benjamin Netanyahu talk about President Trump and putting together that peace accord. Mm-hmm. And he said, only someone with that unconventional, those type of unconventional negotiation skills could have put that together. And I think you look at the results, and I think you see what has been done with the moving of the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, with the peace accords we've seen, and with the positive things we've seen done with the pushback on China and on Russia and on building back our manufacturing jobs. I think people will vote their pocketbook. And I think it was very clear tonight that we're talking about raising taxes or cutting taxes. We're talking about a strong economy or a weak economy. And I think people will understand that Trump and Pence will deliver what they did last April, the strongest economy in the history of the United States.
President Adams, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for being here with us. And we'll be checking in with the Utah Democratic Party Chair Jeff Merchant coming up in just a bit. But for now, Emily, let's send it back to you.
All right, Glenn, thank you. Well, data from September in both Reuters and the Associated Press show roughly 3 to 5% of voters are currently undecided. Political experts say while there are less undecided voters than in 2016, they still make a difference here in 2020. ABC4's Jordan Burroughs explains why those political experts say the margin is smaller than in this presidential election compared to the last.
The smart money is that this election is not as tight as 2016.
National polling data shows the margin in this election will not be as close as it was in 2016. That means
in an election like this one, you have fewer people who are probably on the fence.
Most voters have their minds made up. Roughly 3 to 5% of voters, however, are undecided. Take, for example, Tom Porter, a senior at the U.
I just think there's a lot of uncertainty with both candidates.
James Curry, associate professor of political science at the University of Utah, says undecided voters tend to be young.
Younger people could be more likely to be late decided because they haven't spent as much time being attentive to national politics.
And they tend to be more moderate. They sway one way economically and one way socially.
I would like clarity, and I would like honesty and the ability for a candidate to not just tell me why their opponent is worse than them, but why they consider themselves better than their opponent.
Utah's director of elections adds voters still have time to think about who to vote for.
Our ballots don't go out until next week, so anything that's said this week can still impact the way people are going to vote in the next week or so.
Undecided voters played a key role in the 2016 election, but Curry says this year is not the case, especially with fewer projected undecided voters and the strong opinions of both candidates.
Again, that was ABC4's Jordan Burroughs reporting. So for more post-debate vice presidential debate analysis, let's head right back out to ABC4's chief political correspondent Glenn Mills. Again, live outside Kingsbury Hall. And Glenn, it seems like both sides are claiming a victory tonight.
Yeah, no surprise there, right? That's kind of what we would expect after a debate, although it was kind of interesting to me to hear what the governor had to say about it. He obviously came out in favor of the vice president as a Republican and talked about how he felt the vice president was successful tonight, but he also gave Senator Harris credit for being a strong debater, and he said something along the lines as he saw this as a wash. So that was interesting to hear from the governor. Now we're going to bring in Jeff Merchant. Jeff is the chair of the Utah Democratic Party. Jeff, we just saw what unfolded here in Kingsbury Hall. Your thoughts?
Hey, well, first of all, really great that it's here in Salt Lake City, Utah. I think that really is a great honor for the state of Utah to have. I think that unlike a lot of other vice presidential debates we've had, this is probably one of the most important in our nation's history.
Let's dig into that a little further. You mentioned the importance for Utah, but how about the Utah Democratic Party?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, we've seen Democrats more energized, more excited than ever about this ticket and about Kamala Harris in particular. We had 1,000 people greeting her all along the way that she drove from downtown up here to Kingsbury Hall, and that was only a small minority of the people that are excited about having this woman on the ticket.
From a strategy standpoint tonight, how do you feel Senator Harris performed?
Look, I have said time and time again that Kamala Harris probably had the single most difficult job of any female politician. You know, she was in a debate that required a clear and concise discussion of policy, and I think she did that. I think that she defended Joe Biden's policies as vice president working with Barack Obama. And the reality is I think that she really told the American people exactly what it is that would happen when Joe Biden becomes president.
The strategy coming from the vice president very clear tonight, trying to tie the Biden-Harris ticket to the extreme left.
Yeah.
You know, you vote for them, your taxes are going up. Bringing up the Green New Deal a number of times. We're going to get rid of fossil fuel extraction, ruin jobs. How do you think she countered that argument tonight?
Well, I think she countered it with truth, which is what the Vice President Biden and Senator Harris have been doing from the beginning. Look, we know that Donald Trump is not someone that can be trusted on everything that he says, and the reality is that a lot of what Mike Pence said today just simply wasn't true. The reality is that, you know, when it comes to fracking, when it comes to taxes, when it comes to all of these things that he tried to tie Kamala Harris to the far, far left on, first, those things aren't true. And second of all, the reality is I think that almost the entire night tonight, Mike Pence was on the defensive. And I think that that's exactly what Kamala Harris wanted to see happen, and that's what happened.
A lot of times, though, it comes down to how you're going to spin it. We
Right.
have heard the vice president say that he's going to repeal the president's tax cuts. So they look at that and say, okay, he's going to raise taxes. How's that going to play out if we do see a change in administration?
Well, you know, I mean, it's like they always say, you know, there are two things you don't want to see made, sausage and the law. And I think that the reality is one of the biggest problems that we have in American politics today is we love to break everything down into a little soundbite. And it may have sounded great listening to Mike Pence say that on the debate stage, but the reality is that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have done nothing for us to make to think that they're going to be outright lying to us. And that's not the case with what Donald Trump has done. That's why you heard Kamala Harris say, if the doctors say that a vaccine's fine, I'll take it. But if Donald Trump says it's okay, all bets are off the table. And it's because we can't trust what this administration says.
You were inside the hall tonight, correct?
Yes.
So you got one of the hard to get tickets
One of the very
tonight.
coveted. I don't even know how I got it. All I can say
Well,
is
here
thank
you are. You got it. What was it like to be in there and witness what is an historic event for the state of Utah?
You know, it's interesting because there was certainly an energy, but the thing that I was the most surprised by was kind of the reverence in the room. Everyone was very respectful. You know, obviously there were a few sparks between the senator and the vice president, but the reality is everyone was very respectful of the space and of what was going on. Most interestingly, you know, if you looked at the back, they had that emblem of an eagle, and it said the Union and the Constitution forever. And for me, that's what this election really comes down to. It comes down to the way that we practice democracy in this country and how seriously we're going to take the Constitution moving forward.
After the last couple of weeks, I would have to say moderating a debate is one of the hardest jobs in the country.
Yeah.
How do you think this one played out, though, comparing it just to last week?
Well, certainly it was not the fiasco that we saw last week. I mean, I think that's the only word that can be used to describe what happened last week. I am surprised, particularly with Mike Pence, that he was still as aggressive as he was, both to Kamala Harris and to the moderator, Susan Page, who, you know, both of whom were interrupted multiple times. Not to say that Kamala didn't do that once or twice, too.
I think I saw a little bit of it on both sides.
Yeah, certainly. But, you know, being the moderator is hard, and I was a little surprised that there wasn't more respect given to Susan Page, particularly after what happened last week.
All right, Jeff Merchant, Chair of the Utah Democratic Party, thanks for your time and analysis.
Absolutely.
Appreciate having you with us.
Thanks.
All right, Emily, we'll send it back to you.
All right, thank you, Glenn. Well, vice presidents of the United States spend most of their time in the shadows, receiving only a fraction of the attention and media coverage of the president. But that doesn't mean that they do not have important roles and responsibilities. ABC4's Rick Aaron has that angle.
First and foremost, the VP is one heartbeat away from becoming the leader of the free world.
This is the person that takes office if there's a death or resignation of the president. That's primarily it. There's only one constitutional role for the vice president, and that is to preside over the Senate, which essentially means this, is that person will cast the tie-breaking vote if there is a tie in the Senate. Otherwise, they're not even able to address the Senate without being able to be invited by the Senate itself. Those are the two primary roles set by the Constitution for the vice president.
The vice president can also be called upon for diplomatic duties and foreign policy negotiations.
The vice president effectively becomes the emissary for the president of the United States to events all over the world for certain parts of the portfolio. This is an executive branch function where the vice president goes where the president needs representation. It is the big dinners, sometimes it's in negotiations, sometimes it's dealing with another country depending on their expertise or their negotiation skills or their economic development skills. If they come with certain sorts of experience levels, they get implemented in different kinds of ways. It's entirely, though, at the discretion of the president.
All right, thank you. That was Rick Aaron reporting. And a U.S. president has not died in office since President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in 1963. But with one candidate who turned 78 this month and the other 74 years old and battling from COVID-19, it has to at least be a consideration this time around. Okay, well, moving forward with our post-debate analysis, we'll head right back out to ABC4's chief political correspondent, Glenn Mills, again, live from Kingsbury Hall. Glenn?
Yeah, what a day here at the University of Utah, Emily, and a historic event here for the city of Utah. Never has an event like this been hosted in our state. And a lot of eyes, not only across the country, but even the world, focused right here on this vice presidential debate. Now, earlier in our evening newscast, we talked a lot about what to expect, and those we talked to really nailed it. We knew that Senator Harris would really be coming after the administration for their COVID pandemic response, and we saw that right off the bat. We knew that the vice president would be trying to tie the Biden-Harris ticket to the extreme far left, and we saw that many times, as well as he referenced increasing taxes, stance on abortion, and brought up the Green New Deal many times. So it really played out a lot different than last week, but in ways that we really expected it, and a lot of people coming out, and as we mentioned earlier, that Democrats seeing that their candidate did really well, Republicans seeing that theirs did as well. Emily?
All right, Glenn, thank you so much, and for your coverage tonight. The interviews you gathered, a lot of insight given, so thank you again. Well, still ahead on ABC4 News at 10 o'clock, so in just about 20 minutes, as you heard, we'll continue our post-vice presidential debate coverage and analysis with experts and voters digging into the performances of both Mike Pence and Kamala Harris. Again, that's happening tonight. You can catch it all live on ABC4 News at 10 o'clock. And you can watch more right here on ABC4.com and get ABC4 News live anywhere you go. Just head to ABC4Plus.com that you're watching now to download our app. That does it for us. We'll see you again on ABC4 at 10.